Writing good objectives is one of the most important aspects of teaching and something that you will use every day for every subject that you teach. One of the things to keep in mind when writing good objectives is making sure that your students are challenged to use different types of thinking throughout their learning. One of the frameworks that we use to classify types of thinking would be Bloom's taxonomy. If you look in your textbook on page 115, Bloom talks about 4 different types of knowledge and 6 different ways of thinking about that knowledge. We will be referring to those 6 different types when you're writing objectives to help you consider the different types of thinking you're requiring of your students. Those 6 types are remembering information, being able to understand information, being able to apply that information that was just learned, being able to analyze information, evaluate the information, and then create using the information given. You should use a variety of the different types of thinking within your objectives as you develop a unit of study so that your students are going from one level to the next. One thing to note is that these levels are sequential. First, you have to remember it before you can understand it. You must understand it in order to apply it. You have to apply it in order to analyze it, and you have to first analyze it before you can evaluate it. And you must do all of those steps before you can then create something new using that information. It's important to note that objectives are very different from goals. Goals are an overarching aim, and it's important to note that they are not measurable, whereas an objective is very specific, contains a specific objective, and you may need many objectives to achieve just one goal. For example, a good objective always contains a clear action. Students will label correctly the parts of the water cycle. What are students going to do? They're going to label correctly. A bad example would be students will understand the water cycle. How will you know if they've understood it? How will they demonstrate that to you? How can you see that specifically? Another bad example would be students will study about the water cycle. Again, how will you know if they've achieved that or not? So it needs to be visible and easily measurable. A good objective would be students will correctly identify 3 different geometric shapes. How will you know if they've done it? They've correctly identified it. A bad example would be students will appreciate the difference between a triangle, a square, and a circle. While you know what you want them to accomplish, how will you know if they've actually accomplished it or not? You can't see them appreciate the differences. You can't document them appreciating the differences. So a good goal again would be students will correctly identify 3 different geometric shapes. Either they've done it or they haven't. At this time, you should try writing some objectives. Whatever comes to your mind, it doesn't matter the subject or the grade level, just write them down. Then sit back and evaluate them. Are they specific with an action that can be measured? Or are they too broad or not measurable? Usually, if they're not measurable, they'd be more appropriate as an overarching goal. Students will study the weather patterns, typically seen in America. Of course, the water cycle would come under that, so an objective would be students will label the water cycle. You'd also have other objectives to meet that goal. Students will identify 6 different types of clouds. Students will state what to do in case of a hurricane. Something measurable. If you have further questions, feel free to let me know.